All right, how's it going? So here we're going to do a walkthrough of a Codap exploration with this birthdays dataset. So you can find this dataset on our Canvas page, but here if you take a look, each row has basically every day from 2003 up to 2014. Now in each row, right, we've got our year, our month, date of the month, so 1 through 31, and then day of the week, right? So 1 is a Monday, 2 is Tuesday, and then 6 and 7 are the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Now in E is the column that we really care about. That's the number of US births in that day, right? So each row is one day. So for example, let me scroll down a bit, right? It's a very large data set, about 4,000 rows. Let's see, in 2006, this is February 3rd, and it's 5, so this would be a Friday. There were 13,000 births, right? So that's how we can look at this data set here. Now, if we want to analyze this, we can do this very easily in Codap. So what we're going to do is we're going to locate this file. I have it saved in my desktop right here. So I should have this file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to Codap, and I'm just going to hit Launch Codap, right? And I'm just going to create a new document. Now, when we have a file like this is what we call a CSV file, or a comma separated value file. What we can do is we can just take these files, right, wherever you have them located. You can drag and drop in here and just drop it in Codap. You can also hit this menu and go import if you want to drag or locate your file here as well, as another option for you. But we can drag and drop and we get a nice table here for us, right? So we see we had about like 4,383 rows going all the way up to 2014. So if you want to find your birthday in this data set, see how many births, how many other people were born on the same day as you go for it. So we see we have this one column here with nothing in it, just ATTR stands for attribute. We can go ahead and delete that. So if we want to delete a column, we can just delete attribute. There we go. Okay, so in Codap, we can do so much analyzing here. So I'm going to start by making a graph. Now I'm going to take this births column and just drag it in here. So it takes a second, right? So each dot here, I'm going to make it a little bigger so we can see. Each dot represents one day. So, and this creates what we call a dot plot, right? Just the distribution of births. So on the x-axis, we have the number of births, and each dot represents one day. Now in Codap, you can click on specific values, right? So I'm going to click right here. So in 2005, I guess here, there were 13,260 births on this day, right? And then we can also look down here, and we see over here, right, this is where there's a clump where there's fewer, so this is around 7,000. Now, right away we notice, if we're looking, we kind of see two very distinct sections of this dot plot, right? We have one over here, right, all this data, and then over here, all this data, right? So in Codap, you can highlight data points, and it's actually going to select all of the values here in our table. So I go ahead and highlighted everything on this smaller clump here, and we can take a look at these values. So before we analyze these values, let's talk a little bit more about this distribution. So the word that we want to use to describe this is bimodal, right? So here when we're describing distributions, we want to use our acronym SOX, right? So SOX stands for shape, outliers, center, and spread. So let me make this text box bigger so we can all see, right? So these are the words that we want to use to describe these distributions, and there's notes on Canvas if you'd like to go a little bit more deeper into this topic here. Now for shape, right, the shape of this is what I said is bimodal, right? So basically that means there's two main peaks, right? We have one main peak here and one main peak here, right? We kind of have two main areas of data, right? Now outliers are any data that is far away from the mean, right? It doesn't really seem like there's too many outliers, anything that's too out of the ordinary. So we can just leave this blank for now. Now the center might be a little tough to analyze here, right? But we have two ways of analyzing center, right? We can either do the mean or median, right? So the mean is the average and the median is that middle value, that 50th percentile. So in Codap, we can hit this ruler. And here we have this option here, measures of center, and we see our two options, mean and median. So I'm going to go ahead and click both of these. So my mean here is about 11,368, and my median is bigger, right? So it's about 12,364. Now we see that these aren't always the same thing, right? We'll talk about later about what makes the mean and the median different. But for now, we can just say, I'm just going to write my median of about 364, I'm sorry, there we go. Now our spread, right? Spread kind of just talks about how is this data distributed. Now we have a couple ways of assessing spread. Now here in Codap, if we hit this ruler again, we can hit this where it says measures of spread. Now I'm going to click this option for standard deviation. We'll talk more about standard deviation, but it's basically assessing what is the average distance away from the mean. So we have our mean here, which is about this 11,000 value, right? So the average distance, right, we get our standard deviation of about 2,386. So don't worry too much about what that means. We'll talk more about that in context later, but standard deviation of 2,386, right? So that's what we want. We can address my value. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these so we can look at the graph a little bit more. Now, I said earlier this is bimodal, this distribution here. Now, why do we think that's the case, right? So in Codap, it's very easy for us to kind of analyze these values by highlighting some of these values. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight these values again, right? All these in the lower clump. Now let's look at our table, right? So it highlights all these values. So all the values that are highlighted are the ones in this lower section. We see the births are all lower, right? They're around this 8,000, 7,000, right? Where everything over here is closer to like the 12,000 to 14,000 range, right? Now we can scroll through this table and let's see if we notice any trends about these values, right? So here I'm going to look at this day of the week column, right? Now here we notice that we see 6 and 7 popping up a lot. 6 and 7, 6 and 7, right? 6 and 7. So 6 and 7 represents our weekend days, so Saturday and Sunday, right? Now what's interesting about this is it turns out there's a huge difference in the number of births on weekends versus weekdays, right? Now there could be a lot of factors that go into this, right? Maybe people just don't want to have births on weekends, right? Maybe they'll just wait for a weekday. Maybe that there's like planned C-sections for weekdays, right? You don't plan those for weekends. I don't know exactly all the details. If you want to do more research into that, go for it. But we notice that this trend, right? So here, these are basically all my weekdays, right? And then this is going to be my, or I'm sorry, on the left is my weekends. And then over here, mostly my weekdays, right? So we can take a look at this, right? So we can see all these values, right? So these are mostly 1 through 5. Now in Codap, we can look at our data in many other different ways, more than just this graph. So I'm actually going to take this day of the week attribute. I'm going to drag it over to my y-axis here, right? Now what this does is it kind of splits my data, might take a sec to do this, right? Into kind of, basically makes a scatter plot, right? Now we can kind of see, right? For 6 and 7, right, the averages of these are lower, right? They're less than these values over here, right? Okay, I'm actually going to get rid of this real quick. And I can do that by just clicking here and saying, oh, I'm actually going to hit this treat as categorical option right now because right now it's kind of reading it as a scatter plot. We'll talk more about scatter plots later, but I kind of want to read this as categorical data. So if I say treat as categorical, it's going to split it up into 7 different segments, right? So now we can see kind of the breakdown of the different days of the week. So up here, right, we've got our weekends, and then all of our weekdays, right, Monday through Friday. Now, if we hit this ruler button again and we hit like our mean and median option, it's going to give us our mean and median for each individual distribution for each day of the week, right? So we can kind of split it up. And we see that our weekends, right, have an average around 7,000, 8,000, right? And then for the weekdays, right, it's significantly more. We can tell that from our graph, right? Now we see some values, right? There's some values that are like way over here, right? Maybe some outliers for these distributions, right? So it's a lot easier to analyze this data set when we break it up in terms of day of the week, right? Okay, so this gives us some more insight. Maybe let's look at some of these values. Like, why is this day in 2013 so much less than the rest of the days? I guess this is a Wednesday, right? Most of the average of a Wednesday is about 12,000. But this value is definitely an outlier, right? It's about half as much, 6,000. So I'm going to click this value, right? Okay, let's take a look at this row. We have 2013, and the month is 12, and the day is 25, right? So that's Christmas Day. So it turns out, right, on holidays, we tend to have fewer births. So we can look at that a little bit more. So in our table, I'm going to go back to my table, go up to the top. Sometimes it can be a little finicky to scroll. I'm just going to do that real quick. Go up to the top. Now, we can actually filter and sort this table based off of some attributes. So I'm going to click this births attribute. Now I'm going to hit this sort ascending, right? So I want to sort them from the lowest births to the highest, right? So let's do this. And now we can see, right? Look at the top 8 days with the lowest births, right? If we highlight all of these, right, we notice that all of these days are, Codap. All of these days here are on Christmas Day, right? So the 8 days with the fewest births are all on Christmas. No one wants to have a child on Christmas, I guess, is the trend that we're noticing, right? So we can use these graphs to analyze these trends here. Awesome. Okay, so we can do a lot more playing around in Codap. For example, if we want to take this day of the week attribute and pull it over to the left, right, we can kind of create like a filter over here. So I'm going to pull this over here. Now I'm going to make a new graph. I'm going to minimize this one over here just so we can have space so we can see. I'm going to do the same thing by dragging my births over here, right? So we've seen this graph before. We don't need to spend much time talking about it. It's taking a second to load. Okay. Now what this does is, say we're still looking at the days of the week, I can select one of these days and it's going to highlight all of the days that were a Sunday, right? So I click 7 and we see, okay, these are all of my Sundays, right? 6, these are all my Saturdays, right? So it seems like there's generally more births on Saturdays than Sundays, right? We see when I click 7, we get all these values to the left, Sunday, everything to the right. Now say I just want to look at a distribution of just the weekends, right? So what I can do is I can click both of these values. So I did shift click on, so I clicked 7 and then shift click on 6, and that highlights both. So that highlights all of my weekends. Now in our graph, right, if we go to this, my eye, go here, select these values, my bad. Right. If I select this eye, we can hide these unselected cases. Say I just want to look at these cases that I selected, so I'm going to hit hide unselected cases. So now I'm just looking at the weekends, right? So if I just want to analyze, okay, I just want to look at all the weekend days, I can do that here. So let me look at my mean and median, right? So the average number of births for the weekend is about 7,800, right? And we notice when we have a distribution like this, my mean and my median are much, much closer together, right? Whereas if I were to look at all of my cases, right? So let me hit this restore, right? We see when I add both of these, right? It's going to pull my mean and my median apart, right? That's because we have all these values here, and these values over here are going to be pulling my mean to the left. All right. So in Codap, we can kind of filter with our eye, right, to see what, just to select what we want to see, right? But here we've got everything. All right, now we could also do lots of other things we can do with this data set, but I think that's enough for today. So here's just some main basic features in Codap. Thanks for watching.